Sarah Pavelka has 14 years of experience teaching and coaching in organization performance and continuous improvement. And she holds degrees in biology and psychology from Luther College in Decorah, and occupational therapy degree from Concordia University in Wisconsin. She's also now co-authoring the book, The Tool Time for Healthcare.
Tool Time for Lean.
For which?
Tool Time for Lean with David.
Tool Time for Lean with David. So when we're looking for speakers for this conference, and this goes back a year or so, to contrast Dr. Deming's message with Lean and Six Sigma, I think there's a lot to be gained from contrast, so you can see what the differences are, and also some of the similarities and where they can be used together. I asked Sarah why it is that Dr. Deming started off with just saying, eliminate performance appraisals. They're no good, they never were, so just stop them. And then also I have asked every Lean practitioner that I have come across, has anybody, and I'll ask it to you too, has anybody ever heard of a Lean project that looks at the waste associated with performance appraisals? And I can't find any. I've been looking at that for a long time. So hopefully this afternoon, Sarah can help us with those types of questions and comments. Sarah?
All right. Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be here, and I'm very humbled and honored to be asked to speak today. One of the things that I hope to do in this session is, A, keep you awake after lunch, now that you've had the opportunity to do that. As Dick said, I do have a background in healthcare, and I think there's a few other miscellaneous healthcare folks in the room with me today, but I also have a background in education and manufacturing. So how does all that fit in there? Well, my manufacturing background first. That's really how I got into continuous quality improvement and quality and started to learn Deming's methodology and first hear about Deming. When I started practicing as an occupational therapist, I was in a community in Iowa that was very heavy in manufacturing, very, very supported by the manufacturing groups. And they pulled me in and they said, hey, you folks in healthcare have to learn what we're doing. And so that was my challenge that I had from our manufacturers in town. And so we started to learn in healthcare really before a lot of the healthcare folks started to do this work about the improvements and what does quality mean and what did Deming bring to the table to help improve from a manufacturing standpoint. So that's really how I got into it, was not so much through healthcare, but actually through manufacturing. And I still continue to do a lot of work with manufacturing. I do focus on healthcare quite a bit, and I also focus on education. Now, where does education come into this? I went to Des Moines University, which is one of the two medical colleges in Iowa. If you don't know, actually there's more than one. There's the other school in Iowa that has one as well. For those of you who are from Iowa State, know that Iowa is the other medical college as well. So there's more than just one college in Iowa as well. But we have a program at Des Moines University that offers a master's in healthcare administration. So I'm actually a faculty at Des Moines University. I teach online. I teach here around Iowa and help students who are learning to be future leaders in Iowa and in healthcare really around the world about Deming and his practices. My two classes that I teach really have focused on Deming and the teachings that he has brought to the table for healthcare. So I also have that little bit of education background as well. So for those of you who are fellow educators in the room, I commend you. I laugh that I love what I do, and it's so much fun to see students grow and individuals learn about what they can do to help their future leadership skills, or whether it's you're teaching future teachers how they can continue to help their individuals in their classrooms improve. So that's a little bit of my background. When you look at my bio, you're thinking, what does she have to do with being here? So that's what I have to do with being here. My other background is in continuous improvement and lean. I am a practitioner of lean. And I know for some of you who don't necessarily know much about it, you're going to learn a little bit about it today. So that's one of the first questions I want to ask. How many in the room have actually, or well, let me back up. How many are actually from a manufacturing background? How many? Okay, how many are from education? So I know who I'm, all right, so who I'm talking to. How many have actually use the tools and methodologies of lean in their work setting? Okay, about the same half. All right. So I've got a good opportunity today. I am going to do an overview. For those of you who have practiced with lean and used the lean methodologies, you're going to hear a little bit about it today. One of my ways that I kind of survive the world of all of this stuff that gets thrown at us is keeping it simple. So hopefully today you're going to learn something how to keep it simple and then roll it out to your folks when you go back home. So even if you've practiced a lot of the lean stuff that we talk about today, hopefully you hear some new way to present that material and it can help you roll it out. So even if you've had a lot of this background, by all means, feel free to kind of steal shamelessly from the way that I say it. Or after I'm done, come up and tell me, hey, I like to say it this way better. I like that. It's all about continuous improvement as well. One other quick question. How many of you are from Iowa? And then again, how many traveled more than 4 states away? Where am I at? Okay, for those of you who come north, I apologize for the weather. Wednesday it was 80 and we golfed, so I'm sorry about this. And they did talk about snow tomorrow or tonight or tomorrow or something like that. So welcome to Iowa as we know it. Those of us who are from Iowa, we're used to this kind of weather. But that's my one apology. Objectives for the day. We're going to talk about the 2 philosophies. We're going to talk a little bit about how they work together and how they are somewhat different. And then really we're going to end with how do we work them together? How do we continue to think of Deming and his methodologies and his philosophy that he has brought to the table, which some of us tend to forget. We're not always the best at being able to think about all those things all the time. But really, how do we infuse the Deming philosophy with lean and some of the tools that we have brought to the table with the lean manufacturing world and be able to blend them and really, in the long run, produce a better output? So you have an opportunity for those objectives today. I know I want to leave plenty of questions for, or time at the end for questions, but since you guys are right after lunch, oops, back me up. There we go. Since we are right after lunch, I have to do a little fun for you if I can get the technology to work. That is one of my favorite videos to show to a group of people. By the way, it's out on YouTube for those of you who want to steal it. You can also go out and steal it. It's called Escalator Failure, and it gives you the opportunity to think about sometimes our work and the way we do things. How many of you have ever felt like you've been on that escalator? Come on, be honest. Yeah. Where you get halfway up and it stops, and you're looking around thinking, am I the only one here? How can I get out? And the answers are so obvious. They're right in front of you, but you can't get out. You're just stuck. And that's a lot of times what happens with our work, whether it's a business or education or even healthcare. The answers are right there in front of you, and we sometimes can't get out. I have a feeling that's probably what Dr. Deming had always talked about or felt like. Those answers are right there in front of us, and they were so obvious for him to see. But for those of us who are in the muck of the world that we live in, it's very, very difficult for us. So I love that video because it talks about how can we really see our world differently? And that's one of the things that I want to do today is talk about how can we see our worlds differently. If you're a lean freak like I am, I'll admit it, I love it ever since I got into it. And if you're a Deming zealot, you've been there and you've read all the books and studied all the work and been to his lectures, which I never got the chance to do, which I'm very sad. But good thing that there's YouTube and we get to still see those. But the opportunity for us to think of our worlds differently, and that's what we're hoping to present today. Some of the Deming teachings that we're going to lightly touch on. You've had some great speakers this morning, and we'll have some awesome presentations this afternoon, I'm sure. Tomorrow we continue with the learning. I'm not going to go through this, but these are some of the things that I want to touch on that are critically important when we think about the differences between Lean and Deming and his teachings, and even some of the similarities. Because in the long run, what I want you to walk away with is, whether you knew it or not, they're actually more similar than different. The teachings of those individuals and what they were trying to hope for manufacturing and now business and education and healthcare, they're very, very similar. But these things come up in the Lean teachings as well. But from Deming, we heard this morning about system of profound knowledge, did a great job with those points. Culture, I think, is one of the things that Deming would have probably wrapped his arms around and said, you need to be able to have this as part of your work, your culture, the way that we do. And we hear that in America a lot. We talk about culture. It's the culture. The way we do it here, it's the culture. Absolutely. And there's so many things that can go wrong in culture, and there's so many things that can go right. And so that's our continual challenge, of being able to wrap our arms around it and be able to say, how can we change this work? And how can we do it better? And it leads back to culture. One of the other important teachings that we talked about is leadership. And not just those that have the title. It's those individuals, no matter who you are, where you're at, no matter what. And you hear those stories from the educators in the room. You hear those stories of the kindergarten student who taught us something as the instructor. That's about leadership. And no one ever really is born and said, you know what? I'm a leader. It's something that I think you're born with, but I also think you have the opportunity to learn how to be a better leader. And so one of the opportunities that we talk about today is, how do we strengthen that as future leaders or as continual leaders in your organization. It's important for us to remember that it doesn't matter if you have the title or not, you can help your organization. It's about the people. It's about the people at the front line who do the job. I started my healthcare career as a hospital housekeeper. Now, there's not too many more jobs. You know the show, The World's Worst Jobs? That would probably be one of them. I love my hospital housekeeping roots because of what it taught me about the people. The reason that I am not did not go into medical practice was because of a physician at the organization I worked with. I was pushing my cart along on Saturday morning at 6 a.m. as a 19-year-old student, and I was dressed in brown polyester pants and a gold top, which was not very fashionable in the 90s, mind you. And I walked into an elevator, and in came a physician who I'm sure had to be somewhere very, very quickly, literally took my hospital housekeeping cart and shoved it out of the elevator and closed the door on me. And I had an individual around the corner that saw that happen. She was an occupational therapist, and she talked to me about what happened, and I said, you know, I was going to go into medicine, and she said, not anymore. So she talked to me about being an occupational therapist, and it changed my life. It depends upon those people at those moments that can change your world. So don't ever underestimate the time when you can say, I've changed somebody's world. And you can still tell. It's emotional to me as well. The other thing that we're going to talk about today is the 14 points. I'm not going to talk about all of the 14 points. We would be here for the next century if I could talk about all the 14 points. But what I do want to cover are some of those points when we talk about lean, and I'll throw in a little bit of Six Sigma as well, really focusing mainly on lean. But what are the differences in those 14 points? And again, I apologize. I kind of picked the points that I thought were applicable, but there's also some great contrasts, and there's some great similarities to the other points that I don't mention today. But I want to keep in mind that there are the 14 points as part of Deming's teachings. The other thing that I'm going to do is talk a little bit about the PDSA and PDCA model. And what does this have to do with lean, and what does it have to do with the methodologies, and be able to look at that continuous improvement loop. How many of you were in here and heard the gentleman from Hallmark talk about his methodologies? Okay, did a great job. If you didn't, make sure you get his PowerPoints. He talked about the activity of improvement, and that's one of the things. Again, I'm not going to have this be a PDSA class, but I am going to talk about that there's some distinct differences and similarities as well, but we're going to talk a little bit about the PDSA or PDCA model. For those of you who are new to all of this, it's up there for you, what it means. And I don't want to underestimate the fact that there's been a lot of folks who have changed those words in this for what works for them and their organization. But the opportunity to look at it here in the Plan, Do, Study, Act model as we talk about it later today. So from this point, I am going to transition a little bit and talk a little bit about lean and the methodologies of lean. So for those of you who haven't or don't have a real strong background in it, I want to talk about where did all this stuff come from. Well, the lean methodology actually came from the work that was done at Toyota and a number of other companies, but mainly Toyota. And it started out as the Toyota production system. And you hear some individuals still call it the Toyota production system. It's some of the names have been kind of changed to protect the innocent, if you want to call it that. But the opportunity, you'll hear folks in businesses and manufacturing, and even some in healthcare and others that have picked up the methodology as calling it either Toyota production system or lean. There's small caveats between the two, but honestly, when I look at the work and we go through and study the work, it's individuals who put it in a different package with a different bow on it. The heart of it and the meaning of them are still very, very similar. So when you hear people talk about Toyota production system or lean, that's really what you're looking at, is the same thing. Did start off with the Toyota Motor Corporation. And where did Toyota really pick up on all of this? Well, lo and behold, it was from Deming's teachings. They were one of those companies that really picked up on and studied the works of Deming after World War II and said, we can do this better. We need to produce a better product. We have to start looking at the way we do things better. And you heard the speakers this morning talk about Toyota and putting the cars together and not having to slam things in. And that's absolutely the way it should be. But you'd be surprised on how many things we just accept those defects and we continue to move forward with those. It's created a system to both raise the level of quality as well as enhance operations. In other words, what what is on the end, what's at the end of that assembly line at Toyota is extremely important. But it's also extremely important on how they actually get it done and how it works throughout. And so they talk about having tools like stop the line and be able to say, let's not pass this defect. And those are critical components that we talk about in Deming's work as well, producing quality right the first time, not having to go back in and fix it. So the background of lean, where does it come from? It really came from the Toyota production system. It really hits the U.S. in two different worlds. The first one, and if any of you are interested, you can go out and get it. It's called The Machine That Changed the World. It was the first book by James Womack and Daniel Jones that talked about the Toyota production system as part of a lean production system or lean manufacturing. So if you're interested, by the way, you can get them out on the world of Amazon now for like $0.25. So it's a pretty good economical read out there for you. But in the 1990s, that was the first book that really talked about the lean production system or lean manufacturing. So you can see we went all the way from after World War II all the way up to really, we heard today, 80s back in the U.S. and even 90s before we hit lean. So we are very, in the U.S. and other companies, when we talk about using these methodologies, we're very much of an infant. And there's companies out there that have used lean for years that would say we are not even close to knowing what we could do to improve. We are so far away from this. And so we really, in the lifespan of this, haven't not had a lot of experience with it. The other book that changed it, and we talk about it, is called Lean Thinking. Again, if you're interested, you can pop down here after I'm done with the presentation and you can go through it. This was the next big book. When you hear folks talk about lean, this really is the one that they talk about the most. Again, it wasn't the earliest one. It was just kind of the one that really hit the consumer market and really got folks interested in it. So those are a couple of things where it came to light and we started to use it. Now, I caveat that there were many, many organizations that were using lean or Toyota production system. So if you're sitting there and you're from one of those companies saying, we were doing this stuff before the 90s, you're absolutely right. The idea of these philosophies and the way that we changed our production world were long before this in some companies. For example, I mentioned that I was with a company in Iowa when I first started to learn it. Pella Corporation was really where I cut my teeth. For those of you who are not from Iowa, you usually know Pella Windows and Doors. It's a pretty recognizable name. There actually is a town called Pella, Iowa. And thus, not the original name of the company. It used to be called Roll Screen before that because they had the first actual screen that rolled up and down when your window went up and down. Revolutionary name for a company. But they changed to Pella Corporation, and they have been using lean and the methodologies of the Toyota production system as one example for a very long time. They had their 25th anniversary for lean production, I think probably close to 10 years ago. So you can see that they've been doing this stuff for a long time. So I apologize if you're sitting there thinking we've been doing this for a while, and absolutely. But these two books or these two opportunities were really where the rest of the U.S. kind of picked up on it and said, hey, we should think about this. Something's going on. Something's right. Here is a definition of lean. It is again, keep it simple. If you go through the lean thinking, that's where it came out of. Lean is a systematic approach to look at the flow of information, processes, and materials in order to eliminate waste while striving for continuous improvement to achieve value to the customer. Now, there's a couple important words in there as you read through this. Somebody give me a shout out. What are the first things that you guys see when or read and pick up on when you see this definition? What is it? What's one example?
Eliminate waste.
Eliminate waste. Absolutely. And we're going to talk more about waste in a minute. Dick, you said systematic. Yeah, absolutely. It is a systematic way to look at your organization and look at how you do things. So there are some great foundations there. There was somebody up top.
Enhancing value.
Value to the customer. Yeah. It's all about how can we do things better. Okay, value, somebody stole your answer. Dang! You didn't get your hand up there fast enough. And continuous improvement. So you're starting to see, hey, this PDSA thing, we start to see where it goes. You're starting to read through this. And if I didn't tell you that this was a definition of lean, would you guys have probably said, hey, that could be a definition for some of the work that Deming had done? I would say yes. Starts to sound very familiar, some of those words out there. Other things that we want to focus on that are not necessarily in here, but I do want to mention, when we talk about lean, the methodologies of lean can be practiced in any setting. Very similar to what Deming would have said. Doesn't matter if you're a service organization, doesn't matter if you're manufacturing, doesn't matter if you're education, or doesn't matter if you're healthcare. Another little personal story about when I first started to learn this, it was in the late 90s, in about 97. Healthcare had not really gotten into this stuff yet. We were still very much physician knows best, come in, see the physician, do what needs to be done, run the test, follow their orders, go home, get healthy. It was very much kind of a churn kind of a system. The more people they saw, the more they got paid. It was really about production. But when I started to introduce the aspects of lean in healthcare, and I was one of the first 3 practitioners in the world, well, I should say in the world. Let me back up. I won't brag that much. Probably in the US, that started to bring lean into healthcare. When I first had a meeting about this, I was in a room full of physicians and a room full of CEOs, and I had one individual who literally got up and said, "We are not manufacturing," and got up and walked out of the middle of my presentation. Did it bother me? Absolutely not, because I had individuals who were in the manufacturing world that said, you know what, we started this stuff too. People looked at us like we were kind of the odd man out. We were also the odd individuals. And they said, stick with it, you're the tip of the arrow, and eventually it will get better. Now, again, not because of the work that I've done, but because of the work that tons of other wonderful people across the state of Iowa and other states have done. But I will brag about our state a little bit. We have about 80% of our hospitals in the state of Iowa that are engaged in some sort of lean activities and working very, very hard at achieving value to the customer while reducing cost. We are number 1 in the lowest reimbursement. So Iowa healthcare entities, they are the lowest reimbursed. We are the bottom of the barrel. So we are number 1 in that. We are also tied for number 1 in quality. So we have the lowest reimbursement and the highest quality in the state of Iowa. So we're pretty proud of that. We don't talk about it enough, but we are definitely pretty proud of that. What does that have to do with? It doesn't have to do only with lean, but you know what? I think it's a piece of the puzzle as we talk about it. So a little bit of personal side of the lean journey that we've had here in Iowa. I also think it can be used in any sort of business, whether it's a business of educating small children, whether it's a business of providing services to individuals. It really, truly can be used anywhere. And last but not least, lean focuses on time or the delivery to the individuals, cost and quality. And they don't necessarily focus on them in that order, so I just want to be careful that you know that. But it does look at both time, cost, and quality as they look through at your services. Here's some other quotes directly from the book. Again, you'll see the same patterns, but I wanted to put some of the actual quotes in here. We look at value, creating best sequence, and how do we do things more effectively. Ultimately, it's to satisfy the customer by providing immediate feedback and efforts to convert, and this is one of your first Japanese words of muda, or waste, into value. So you can see the quotes directly from them as well. One of the things that I struggled when I looked at lean, and you start to see the differences in some of the different trainings between and teachings between Deming and the lean world. One of the things that I really struggled with when I first started looking at lean and the methodologies of lean was the fact that of how to do this. I was very much a process person. I wanted to look at processes and know how it worked. I grew up on a farm. My dad was a farmer. He had an 8th grade education, and he knew how everything worked. It was all about processes. He could fix anything with baling wire and duct tape. For those of you who grew up on a farm, that makes a lot of sense to you. That he could possibly do. He could fix anything. It was all about processes, and it was all about fixing those things that went wrong. So when I looked at the lean methodology, I really struggled because I didn't have there was not a clear-cut method for this. And so what I did with a lot of the research that I had gone through and with the work and the different books and putting it all together, however, there is a lean process. Just not all the authors really talked about it. So one of the first things that we do in a lean process is we define the customer value. Looking at it and saying, what does the customer want? Well, we know from looking at things from a system that we can have multiple customers, and that's important. It's important to know who those customers are, what do they want, when do they want it, how do they want it, and what should it do once they get it, how should it perform. So being able to look at that value. The second thing is we need to be able to map what we call the current value stream, or the current process, the way that we actually do the work, right, wrong, or otherwise. And I tell organizations when I go out to help them with lean, I don't want to know what we should be doing, I want to know what we are doing. Let's go watch it. Because everybody knows that if they're doing something that's a shortcut, they know, oh, that's not what the rules say. I'm going to cheat. I'm going to tell you what you want to hear. But I want to know what's really happening out there. And so mapping that current process. The next thing is we look at flow. Where does it flow? Where does it not flow? I wasn't there for breakfast, and I came in late for lunch. I'm not a real good role model when it comes to eating healthy. Sorry, my healthcare providers are the worst as far as eating go. But when we look at things like flow, you guys all know about flow. Lunch lines, why do I bring up lunch and breakfast? The flow through things. Was there a bottleneck in the way that we went through lunch? What was the layout? How did it work? Did it smoothly go, or did we have to stand there and wait? That's what we talk about. It's one aspect of when we look at flow. It's one way to look at it. So again, getting out there and seeing it, how did it work? Being able to observe those things in your opportunities when you look at in your work. The next thing we do when we look at lean is we eliminate waste. We look to say, hey, what's going wrong? And I'm going to talk about the waste aspects here in a minute. You're going to see them and see what they're all about. But how can we actually remove the stuff that gets in our way? And again, when I go out and help folks, what I say is, what drives you nuts? What do you do? What do you do that you'd like to skip? Or what do you skip? Individuals are really good at creating band-aids to processes if they don't like the process. They will create a workaround. I want to hear about those workarounds, because those workarounds, those things that we skipped or we left out, those are the ones that I want to hear. They may not understand why it was important. Why did that thing that they skipped, what value did it give? Or did it not give any value, and so they skipped it? They've learned that their quality is just as good without it, and so they skipped it. Those are the things that we want to hear about. I want to talk about those with folks. The next step is to create standard work. The opportunities for us to look at things and say, we do it the same every time. And I know the word "the same" kind of freaks people out when you hear about it, because we don't want to function like robots. But I heard the best quote ever from an individual who's been doing lean for a really long time when he talks about creating standard work, or what Deming would say, reducing variation. And you look at this and you say, you know what, if we reduce variation or create standard work, it doesn't give you permission to shut your brain off. It actually gives you permission to use your brain in a better way. Because what we do is we know what is expected, and when something is unexpected, we can actually acknowledge it and move forward. So creating standard work or reducing variation doesn't mean we can shut ourselves off. It actually gives us the ability to use our brain in a better, more capable way. And I thought that was great, because again, I know not to have healthcare, but you guys can imagine physicians that I work with in healthcare are very anti-recipe cookbook medicine. They went to med school to be able to train as independent practitioners. And they even call themselves, they're even licensed independent practitioners. That's what their certificate that hangs on the wall means. So when you talk to them about standard work, they fight. For those of you who are in this room, I'm gonna probably, I don't mean to offend, but when I was learning this lean stuff, I talked about physicians and how driven they are and how they are very much anti-standard work. And I had a group of individuals sit in the room and said, oh, don't worry, you guys have physicians in healthcare, but we have engineers in manufacturing. So for those of you who are engineers, I apologize for that, but I guess you guys are just as driven in that sense as well, for those of you who are future engineers. So creating that standard work is important because it helps us understand where that is. You guys didn't laugh at that joke very much. I don't know if that was a good sign or not. I'll keep moving on. The next thing is continuous improvement. Last but not least, we look at continuous improvement, the last step of lean, and being able to cycle through and look at our ways that we do the work and continually improve. So those are the lean processes. Those are the lean steps as we know them today. There are 7 different wastes that we talk about in lean, and I'm just going to jump through these. So you get to see all of them. Now, if you read the lean stuff that's out there today, you will find that there's another one that's sometimes added. I did not add it. I tend to not add it. The last one that you'll see and some individuals will add is underutilized people. So if you're making notes or you want to take that, and I'll tell you why I don't add it. Because when we talk about, in one of the principles of lean, it's not the person or the individual that's the problem, it's the process that's the problem. It's the process is perfectly designed for the output. And I hate to put an individual out there as a waste, as underutilized, because then all of a sudden people start to say, well, then I as an individual am a waste. So I don't put it on there. I go with these 7. Where do these 7 come from? They came out of the James Womack books, and they're the original 7. So you'll see individuals will add that 8th one, but I'm going to go with the true, what I call the true original 7, and give you the opportunity to think about those. Examples of waste: storage and inventory, things sitting around, extra stuff. When we have the opportunity, why is that a waste? Because obviously storage and inventory takes time to heat it, clean it, keep it dry. If you've ever had an opportunity where you've ever had to move, you know that storage is not your friend, the stuff that you put in storage. Transportation, the movement of items, takes time. If you don't have what you need at your work site or where you're at, it takes a ton of time away from productive, valuable work. Overproduction, saying, hey, we've got more than we need. Forms, copies, the extra materials sitting around. If you all of a sudden realize that there's a defect or there's a problem in one of those pieces, you've got extra stuff that you have to get rid of. Processing And processing, the words that I use for processing is anything that you have to do rework on. So anything that starts with refax, recopy, resend, reorder, redo. So you could, again, put your little RE behind processing. Waiting is definitely a defect. We don't like to wait. No one likes to wait. The opportunity for that, and you'll hear more about waiting later on. Movement is very similar to transportation and sometimes confused. But the movement is usually, and I explain the difference to folks, is usually movement is within your boundaries, within your work area. And then last but not least, defects. It takes time, it takes money to deal with defects. So there's the 7 wastes, and there's millions and millions of examples. As you start to study this, you will be an individual like me that walks into a grocery store, walks into a gas station, and you start to recognize this stuff and it drives you nuts. So you'll start to see it everywhere. Oh, and then I did list the 8th one as well. I've already talked about that. So now we're really going to kind of get into the heart of this presentation, and I apologize for taking, for those of you who have that lean background, I apologize for that, but hopefully you learned a new way to say some good stuff. Getting into the disparities and similarities. I sometimes think of bringing people to a new concept or a new way of thinking as kind of like this. We had a series of puppies in our household, and this is kind of what it felt like for about 1.5 years with our puppies. Sometimes you're dragging them to what should be or what should be considered your vision of good. And I didn't necessarily have an opportunity to walk on the beach with them, but if you've ever raised puppies, you get this as far as kind of dragging them along. And that's sometimes what I felt like when we were going through this lean journey and bringing in Deming and some of the aspects that we had. It's like kind of dragging people along. How I set this up and how I want to talk about this today is really list the differences, but also talk about the similarities. So what I did is I mentioned I did not pull out all of the 14 points. There's a few of them, and we'll talk about just a few of them as we go. The first one, creating constancy of purpose. Both Lean and Deming are going to talk about listening to the voice of the customer, knowing who your customer is, knowing the opportunities that you have to provide value. Both philosophies come with a clear focus and determine the purpose in the teams. When we talk about lean as a as a methodology for improvement, lean brings individuals together as a team to focus on that improvement. And so as we talk about this, it's not just the supervisors or managers that get the improvement. Both philosophies very much the same. Both philosophies also talked about creating jobs, not cutting them. So in tough times, it's not about becoming lean and losing individuals. It's actually about how can we create more value and create jobs. The differences. Many organizations that have tackled lean management have taken the philosophy that to become more lean, you literally become smaller or a smaller workforce. And that's not the way to take this. It's not the way to use it. So the misconception out there is that if actually lean, meaning smaller or thinner workforce, the true lean methodology would say, no, that's not it at all. You actually would actually provide more value by cutting out the waste or the things that don't provide value. So the difference is in there. So the purpose is still, again, providing that high value. The next one, and again, I didn't put the entire point up there, but it's really the third one. When we talk about building quality into the product at the first place, getting what we would deem as quality, building it right the first time. Lean talks about focusing on defects as part of the 7 wastes, and there's tools such as mapping or looking at the flow and pull to help do that. But many organizations still put in the place of inspection. You find many lean organizations or organizations that are out there, excuse me, that still do quality inspections. They still have that quality assurance individual. And if you really are getting in and doing it right the first time, you shouldn't have that end of the line production when it's almost ready to go out the door. It should be every individual should know along the way what's quality and what's deemed as purposeful. And as we heard this morning, not pass it downstream. That's a big difference. Instead of having people say, well, I don't know, I just send it down to Joe and he just does it. You've got to get individuals to know. And we still struggle with that. And it's still one of the things with lean that we don't do very well, is getting individuals to understand that whole system and how do things affect each other. I mentioned this one a little bit. Those organizations looking at quality, cost, and time really are the cornerstones of lean. How do we understand that? Deming would agree we have to start with quality. One of the presentation slides that I use all the time in healthcare are the one that talks about the flow or kind of the order, starting with quality. It's amazing in healthcare, what do we want to do? And if you listen to the debate, I'm not going to get political on you, promise. But if you listen to the debate, there were 2 common things that they talked about. Reducing cost in healthcare, and then also producing more jobs. And oh, by the way, they talked about, at the very end, when we talked about the healthcare crisis, oh yeah, we should actually have better quality. Well, it was kind of like, oh yeah, but they wanted to start with cost, and that's, again, not where we need to go. So very successful organizations will say, we're going to start with that quality. However, some lean organizations really use lean, and I put it in quotes because they will actually say we're a lean organization only to save money. I have several organizations that have come to me and said, we are spending too much money. It's costing too much. We don't have enough money. We don't have enough money to make payroll. And the opportunity for us to cut costs. We have to become more lean. Well, you'll quickly realize, or you'll quickly have individuals, if you are using lean as a methodology to cut costs, they will quickly stop coming to your events. They will quickly stop participating in the ideas. Because what they realize is the more ideas for improvement, the less jobs there are. And it will quickly kill your lean methodology. So very organizations that use lean to cut costs. Institute training on the job, very important. What lean talks about is doing things just in time, and they've even given it an acronym, imagine that. That was JIT, just in time, removing that waste. And one of the things that we don't do, and I said both philosophies, if it's seen as a program, the difficulty that brings when you say lean or the Deming, even 14 points, this is our program of quality. When it doesn't become that culture that I mentioned earlier, it doesn't become the way we do the work. When it's just seen as a program. I don't know how many organizations I've gone to say, oh, we're not going to do lean because we have an employee engagement or employee satisfaction program going on right now. I'm like, really? Because you can separate that? It's that easy? And so the opportunity to see, we cannot focus on these as a program. It has to be, again, part of the culture. And that's the differences in a lot of them. I would say probably more lean, use the tools as a program, or use the beliefs that are out there for lean as something that they can put in a place and then take out at a place. And that's, again, the big difference. This point I put in here for you, Dick. This and another one. When we start to talk about supervision, both philosophies have a huge leadership focus. Leadership has to be involved. Leadership should also be there to help people. Again, it's not about hurting people, but it's about helping people. Lean specifically does not focus on merit raises. And we heard, again, the gentleman from Honeywell, he talked about that they don't do merit raises anymore. And I'm hoping that if you got into that and why they don't do those merit raises anymore is because what lean, if you're practicing in a lean methodology, you would say if you've given that person the feedback as you go, so they, just in time, they got it as that maybe that defect occurred or as the opportunity was identified. You've given them feedback. If you're giving it to them again 6 months or 8 months or a year later, that's rework. You've already given it to them once. Why am I giving it to them again? So in the purest simple form of it is that if I've done it once, why am I doing it again? So that's the rework piece of it. Also, lean would look at that and say, if you've identified something 6 months ago with someone and now you're just finally telling them about it on an annual review, there's a lot of time in between that occurrence and now. So why do you have that downtime? Or in lean, it'd be that wait time. It was waiting. You were waiting for that sort of feedback. I don't know if anybody waits for an annual review feedback, but the opportunity to say we should have given them that feedback at the time it occurred, not the months or year or whatever it is later. Again, it's that time lag in between. So when we talk about merits and annual reviews, it's not about whether lean does or does not focus on it. It would focus on that opportunity and say, why didn't you give it to them at that point it occurred? Can we correct the process and get it fixed up front versus all the way at the very end or a year later? So that would be my answer on the whole annual review merit raising pieces of it. And there's not a lot of organizations that are that mature yet in this process and be able to say we are to the point where we don't give those annual reviews. Barriers between the departments. Both philosophies are going to say bring your interdepartmental groups here, bring the teams in. And I honestly think, I'll brag again a little bit about healthcare. Healthcare does a great job of bringing those interdepartmental folks together. I wish some manufacturing and other sectors would do better at bringing those interdepartmental people together. How does one department affect the other department? Leadership has got to understand the system, and the differences in those organizations that don't are those that don't understand systems. And how does this, and understanding what that system has to do. If they kind of go back to that program or that flavor of the month, they're going to struggle, and they're definitely going to struggle with Deming and or the lean concepts. The next one is talking about eliminating slogans. Probably one of the points that lean, again, wouldn't focus on as much. There's no lean principle that says, hey, eliminate slogans. But I think what we're looking at here is lean would eliminate it and say if it doesn't add value, let's remove it. So it's kind of a byproduct of what I would say could be potential, but there's no principle that says, hey, eliminate slogans. But again, if it doesn't add value, if it's not doing what you're helping that customer, it would again talk about removing it. One of the last principles that I would talk about is number 14. Transformation is everybody's job. Again, lean organizations, and you can read it up there. It's a people-focused philosophy. We look at those that do the work, change the work, and that's very consistent with Deming. And I put up here as a difference, automation first. Several organizations that take on lean and have a lean culture want to automate. And if you really get into the books and where it came from, and back to Toyota and even Deming, they would say, we automate last, not first. But several companies, and including a lot that I've worked with, would want to automate. They want to automate. They want to automate. And it's really the thing that we should do last, but many organizations want to do it first. And so being able to work through that cultural difference. And then I'm going to go through just a few differences on PDSA and lean, so you get an opportunity to look at this. This is really where I, again, wanted to focus or did a lot of work as I was kind of cutting my teeth on this, is PDSA is more of a formal process. I know we're switching away a little bit, but lean, it really missed that formal process that I wanted to see. So we have an opportunity. Both PDSA and lean are rooted in Deming's work. Obviously, Toyota Production System is starting the lean piece. Both focus on tools and teams. And then last but not least, both have a rapid cycle improvement. So I wanted to throw a little bit of PDSA in here as well to talk about the comparison between PDSA and lean as well. Because a lot of organizations say, well, we're doing PDSA, we shouldn't do or we can't do lean. And you can say the same thing for lean and Six Sigma. Could have been a whole nother hour presentation on that as well. But I would say probably the same things with those. Again, it's the same content, it's just a different package that we're putting it in. And I'm sure there are many other comparisons as well. If you're looking for some resources, I've given you some here. I want you to have the opportunity to be able to look through these. Again, if you're not familiar with lean, one of the books that are out there and some of the good ones that I found on strictly lean and the lean ideas, it's actually the Lean for Dummies. I know it's a dummy series book, but it's a really good one. In addition to those others, there's tons of lean books out there, so that's an opportunity for you as well. There's some other really good ones, and I'm going to talk about some of them later on. But don't limit yourself on just those books that were created in the 90s. There's some really good ones as well. So now I want to kind of conclude on some of the work that we've been doing, talk about combining these. And here's your next little. But it's the clip obviously was from one of the movies, and again, YouTube, being able to find it, that was their commercial that was out there. But when we talk about combining things, from the clip you can actually see when there was one individual, survival rate was probably not going to be very high. But when we talk about combining things and being able to move forward and do things with better results, I honestly think, and I've been combining this stuff for a long time, and I didn't even really know I was combining it. But being able to say, how can we move forward and do things differently by bringing the benefits of both of the philosophies together and really having some great output. So again, here's kind of a little comic relief for you when we think about getting everybody all lined up. Again, one supporting each other, being able to help each other out. One of the things that we focus on and the work that we bring to the table is really understanding Deming's teachings. You have to be able to kind of get in there. And even doing this presentation, I'm probably at the baby beginnings of some of the other speakers that you'll hear this morning and this afternoon and even tomorrow about Deming's teachings. But taking and looking at those teachings and being able to combine them with your methodology for improvement, whether it's Six Sigma or Lean or even going back and continuing to use PDSA, understanding those teachings, being able to create that support mechanism that you need to combine for better results. Understand both long and short-term success. What does it mean to have a short-term success? You're going to have some great outcomes with some lean tools if you start to practice and use those. But it's only, he's giving me a look like I don't know. But it could be only short-term success. You really have to look at both short and long-term. My other point is don't shut the door on the other continuous improvement philosophies. Steal. I have a toolbox that I use that has Six Sigma tools in it, that has lean tools, that has the 7 basic quality tools in it. It's not about one continuous improvement methodologies. It's about putting the right tool into practice at the right time. And then understanding where they're successful, being able to pull from each of them, use them, combine them, and be able to help understand them as you effectively go. This is also some of the work that we have been doing, and Dick mentioned that David and I put a book out, but this is really a lot of the work that I had been doing prior to this book of saying there's folks out there that understood the PDSA cycle and those that wanted to use lean methodologies and vice versa. How can they combine? What's the benefits of bringing them together? And so this was a crosswalk that I had been using for a long time because we too had used David's work of the 9 steps, there we go, his 9 steps across the top, but really being able to combine them with those lean steps because again, they have a little bit different verbiage, there's some different words in there, but it's really the same thing. We've just titled it something different. Some people spread it out, some people combine things together, but there was a huge crosswalk. But just even this description alone helps people understand that, wow, that lean stuff that we are doing is the same as that PDSA cycle. It really is very, very similar as we start to move forward. So there are some new resources that are out there. This is the book that we produced together to be able to show how those things can work together. And it was a labor of love for both of us. David really had to wrap his arms around, and as you guys have seen, he is Deming fan and philosophy through and through. And I came in the door with this lean stuff, and it took him a while to say, really? Okay. But once we got on the same train track and were able to move it, it was quite powerful. Here's the crosswalk that's in the book. Won't go through that. But we just want to give you the opportunity to think about that you can do things differently and you can combine them, knowing that there are similarities, knowing that there are differences, but being able to pull from when it's needed or the good parts is critically important. And before you guys think of all your questions, because I think I have about 7 minutes.
That will take you through the questions.
Okay, yep, 7 minutes to do questions. This is just another short clip. I think this one's about a minute. I'll let you think of your questions as we do this one.
Here's to the crazy ones.
Again, I know that's an Apple commercial, I apologize, so I like the theme behind it, not to sell the apple, but I still think sometimes we think of ourselves in kind of that organizational development realm of things as the crazy ones. So I appreciate all the other fellow crazy ones in the room today, and I challenge you to think differently as we move forward. So I'll take your questions. Thanks.
Do you have any questions here?
Question, yes?
You kind of indicated that analyzing and charting processes was fairly important, understanding the current system. Do you have any suggestion for resources for that? Or is it in many of these books?
It's in many, it's definitely, and I'll repeat the question. We talked about charting and looking at things, or mapping in a sense, putting out in visual. And I would say, yes, 150% of the time you want to do it. Being able to look at things and look at things visually, and you hear for the educators in the room, those young kids who are doing run charts and control charts and those kind of things. Very, very powerful versus words. I'm sure there's someone in the room could tell me how many of us are auditory learners versus visual learners, and I know that the percentage is way over on the visual side of things. So put things visually. The resources, yep, there's some great resources, and there's actually some great resources out online. You know, the books, you can come up and look at them. But even the lean tools are important, but even the basic quality tools are great to use too in your lean improvements. So, or you know, in your improvements overall. So it's not just the lean tools, but yeah, there's some great resources right here. So, and again, keep it very, very simple.
Learning to see is a good book to look at.
Right, yep, good. Yes, absolutely. Learning to see is another good one. It talks about observation, and it talks about mapping, and it does a great job. Good, other questions?
What are some techniques or things you do to promote lean in a difficult environment, whether it's a union factory facility or like a difficult healthcare place?
How do we incorporate lean in a difficult place? Well, the first thing we have to do is make sure leadership's on board. It's really going to come down to finding those individuals who can be your champion, and it's got to start with leadership. You know, we've tried to work it from the bottom up, but ultimately it works best if you can go from bottom up and top down. You know, from the difficult employees who say, I don't want to do this, or I don't have time to do this, my comment is, well, do you have time to do it over again when it's not right? And getting them to see that this stuff actually saves them time, and that's the focus, is a good way to do it, because when you can win somebody over, they will become your biggest advocate. And I've had very difficult, you know, both union, it doesn't matter if it's union, but difficult union relationships when we talk about saving time. And a lot of times the underlining fear is the word on the street is this lean stuff's going to lose jobs. So you have to get through that, because they probably have heard those rumors and they think those to be true. So that's a lot of times, if you can break down that, what's causing that fear will help. Yep, absolutely.
Is there a relationship between lean and 5S? If so, should 5S precede lean?
Is there a relationship between lean and 5S? Yeah, there's a huge relationship. 5S is one of the principles or the methodologies, like the 7 ways. 5S is one of those. It's not really a tool, but one of those, we put it in as a tool for the lean methodology. So yes, there's a huge thing. When we talk about using 5S as one of the particular methods for continuous improvement, and for those of you who are not familiar with 5S, there's a methodology to look at work and look at your workspace, that there are 5 Japanese words, and they all start with S. Don't ask me to pronounce them, because I can't. But we've Americanized them and made them 5S words that start with S in the US that are English. But I would say I would use 5S when there's an opportunity for flow, if the flow and the supplies are not right. So it's one of those methodologies that I would use in a lean or continuous improvement cycle.
We have time for about one more question, and we have to take a quick break here. If not, Sarah, I want to thank you for the session.
Thank you.